My sister got promoted on a Friday afternoon in September and I found out about it the same way everyone else in the company did, through an email from the department director that arrived in my inbox at 4:53 in the afternoon with the subject line announcing the appointment of the new department head. I read the email twice. Not because I had not understood it the first time but because I wanted to be certain I had understood it completely before I decided what to do with what I understood. The new department head was my sister Priya. The announcement cited her outstanding contributions to the department over the previous 3 years, her innovative approach to data analysis, her consistent delivery of high-quality insights that had driven significant business decisions across multiple quarters. It cited, specifically, 3 projects by name, projects whose methodologies had been praised by senior leadership as particularly sophisticated and forward-thinking. I had built all 3 of those methodologies. My name is Natasha. I am 31 years old. I am a senior data analyst at a company I have worked at for 5 years. I am good at my job in the particular way that people are good at things they care about genuinely, not because the work produces recognition but because the work itself is interesting and the problems it addresses are real and the solutions, when they are right, have a clarity that is its own reward. I had not been receiving the recognition. My sister had been receiving it for 3 years, quietly and consistently, in the particular way that credit moves when one person is presenting work in rooms the person who produced it is not in. This is the story of the email I sent on the Monday after the Friday promotion announcement, and what happened in the weeks that followed, and what I said to my sister when it was all over, which was nothing, because nothing was exactly the right amount. The setup. Priya and I had joined the company 18 months apart. I came first, at 27, hired as an analyst in a department that was small and growing and that suited my particular way of working, which is methodical and detail-oriented and more comfortable with the rigor of the analysis than with the performance of presenting it. Priya joined the same department a year and a half later, hired at a level below mine, which had felt unremarkable at the time because she was newer to the field and the level reflected her experience accurately. What I had not anticipated was how quickly she would orient herself toward the social architecture of the office, the relationships with management, the visibility in meetings, the particular skill of being present and engaged and memorable in the rooms where decisions about careers are made. I did not have that skill. I had other skills, the ones that produced the work that filled the presentations that Priya gave in the rooms I was not in. The first time it happened I did not recognize it as a pattern. Priya had asked to borrow my notes from a project I had completed the previous month because she was working on something adjacent and thought my approach might be useful. I had shared them without hesitation because she was my sister and because sharing knowledge with colleagues is normal and because I had no framework yet for what sharing with Priya actually meant in practice. 2 weeks later I was in a meeting where a senior manager mentioned that Priya had presented a really interesting framework for the adjacent project and asked if anyone had more context on the methodology. I had the context. I had produced the methodology. I said so, briefly, and the manager nodded and moved on and Priya smiled at me from across the table with an expression I had not known how to read at the time but that I understood completely by the time I read the promotion announcement 14 months later. The second time I recognized it. The third time I began keeping records. The records. I want to tell you about the records because the records are the part of this story that required the most patience and the most discipline and that made everything else possible. I started saving files with timestamps in a folder I kept on a personal drive that was not connected to the company network. Every report I produced, every methodology document, every draft and version and intermediate file that showed the development of an idea from its first rough form to its finished state. I saved email threads in which I had shared work with Priya before it appeared in presentations she gave without attribution. I saved version histories that showed the original author of documents that had been submitted under her name. I did this for 8 months without saying anything to anyone. Not to colleagues, not to my manager, not to my parents who knew we worked at the same company and occasionally asked how things were going between us. I said things were fine. I kept the records. I waited for the moment that would make the records matter enough to use. The promotion announcement was that moment. I spent the weekend after the promotion announcement preparing the email. Not writing it, exactly. The writing itself took less than an hour on Sunday evening, because I had known for 8 months what I would say when the moment arrived, and the words were available to me in the way that words are available when you have been carrying them for a long time and finally have somewhere to put them. What took the weekend was the organization of the documentation, the careful assembly of 8 months of records into a package that was complete and clear and structured in a way that required the minimum possible effort from the person receiving it to understand what they were looking at. I approached it the way I approach any analytical deliverable. I identified the audience, the HR director and the department director, both of whom would need different things from the same documentation. I identified the core claim I was making, which was that the work cited in the promotion announcement had been produced by me rather than by Priya, and that this pattern had been consistent across 3 years and was fully documented. I identified the evidence required to support that claim, which I had been assembling for 8 months and which was thorough enough that I was not concerned about gaps. The documentation package contained the following: original files for each of the 3 projects named in the promotion announcement, with creation timestamps showing they had been produced by my account before any version appeared under Priya's name. Version histories for the 2 projects that had been submitted through the company's internal system, showing the original author and the subsequent modifications. Email threads in which I had shared draft work with Priya before the final versions appeared in presentations she had given, the timestamps showing the sequence clearly. A timeline document I had produced myself, 1 page, that laid out the 3 years of the pattern chronologically without editorial comment, simply the dates and the documents and the rooms in which the work had been presented and by whom. I did not include anything about how I felt. I did not include context about our relationship or our family or the particular difficulty of watching a sister take credit for your work while smiling at you from across a conference table. I included only what could be verified independently, because verifiable evidence does not require the recipient to trust the person presenting it, and I wanted the documentation to stand entirely on its own. The email itself was 4 sentences. It stated that I was bringing a matter to their attention that I believed required review. It stated that I was attaching documentation related to the work cited in the recent promotion announcement. It stated that I was available to discuss the documentation at their convenience. It thanked them for their time. I sent it at 8:14 on Monday morning, 16 minutes after I arrived at my desk. The investigation. I did not tell Priya I had sent the email. I went about my Monday the way I go about any Monday, working through the tasks on my list in order, attending the meetings on my calendar, eating lunch at my desk because I had a deadline in the afternoon. Priya stopped by my desk at 11 to say good morning in the easy way she had always moved through the office, warm and unhurried, comfortable in the environment she had navigated so skillfully for 3 years. I said good morning. I asked how her weekend had been. She said it had been wonderful, that the promotion had not fully sunk in yet, that she was excited about the new responsibilities. I said I was sure she would do well. She smiled and moved on. I returned to my work. HR contacted me at 2:30 that afternoon. A woman named Sandra, who I had met once at an onboarding event 2 years earlier and who now sat across from me in a small conference room with the documentation package printed and placed between us, and asked me to walk her through it. I walked her through it the way I walk through any analysis, starting with the overview and moving to the specific evidence in the order that made the pattern clearest. Sandra asked good questions, the kind that told me she was genuinely engaging with the material rather than simply going through a process. She took notes. She asked me whether I had shared this documentation with anyone else before sending it to her and the director. I told her I had not. She thanked me and told me the matter would be reviewed thoroughly and that I would be contacted with next steps. I went back to my desk. I finished my afternoon. I went home at my usual time. Priya called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was 3 minutes long and that I listened to once and then did not listen to again. The investigation took 3 weeks. I know this because I counted them, not obsessively, not in the way of someone who is waiting anxiously for an outcome they cannot control, but in the factual way that I note most things, as information that might be relevant later. 3 weeks from the Monday morning email to the Thursday afternoon when Sandra called me back into the small conference room and told me the findings. She told me the review had been thorough. She told me the documentation I had provided had been cross-referenced against the company's internal systems, version histories, file metadata, and email records that HR had the access to pull independently. She told me the findings of the review were consistent with the documentation I had submitted. She told me the promotion was being rescinded. I did not react visibly. I had not come into that room expecting a particular outcome in the sense of needing one, because I had submitted documentation that was accurate and complete, and I had understood from the moment I sent the email that accurate and complete documentation produces accurate and complete findings when reviewed by people whose job is to follow the evidence rather than to protect a position. I had trusted the process because the process, in this case, had the same evidence I had. Sandra continued. She said the company took the matter seriously and that appropriate steps were being taken regarding Priya's conduct, the specifics of which she was not able to share with me directly. She said the department director wanted to meet with me at my earliest convenience to discuss the department head position and whether I would be interested in being considered for it. I told her I was available the following morning. The meeting. The department director was a man named Gerald who I had worked with indirectly across 5 years and whose opinion of my work I had understood to be positive in the general way that a manager's opinion of a competent employee is positive without being specific. He had not known, I understood from the first minutes of our conversation, the full picture of what had been happening in his department for 3 years. The investigation had clarified the picture for him, and he was sitting across from me with the particular quality of a person who has just understood that something significant was occurring under his oversight without his awareness and who is now recalibrating. He said he appreciated that I had brought the matter forward through the appropriate channels. He said the documentation I had submitted was the most thorough he had seen in a situation of this kind and that it had made the review significantly more straightforward than these matters typically were. He said he wanted to be direct with me about the department head position, that the work cited in the promotion announcement was clearly work I had produced, that the department's reputation in senior leadership was built substantially on that work, and that he believed I was the person who should be leading the department going forward. He asked if I was interested. I told him I needed 24 hours to consider it. Not because I was uncertain. Because I have learned, over the course of a career spent working carefully and without much fanfare, that the moments when something significant is being offered to you deserve to be received with the same deliberateness that produced them, and that saying yes immediately to something you have earned through years of patient work does not honor the patience that made it possible. I called Gerald the following morning and told him yes. The silence. Priya and I have not spoken since the Monday she left the 3-minute voicemail I listened to once. I want to be clear about why, because I think the silence is sometimes misread as anger or as punishment, and it is neither of those things. I am not angry at Priya in the active way that anger burns. What I have is something quieter and more settled, an understanding of who my sister is and what she is capable of that I did not have 3 years ago, and a clear sense of what I am willing to build a relationship around and what I am not. I am not willing to build a relationship with someone who took my work for 3 years and smiled at me from across a conference table while doing it. Not because the taking was unforgivable in some absolute sense, but because the smiling was. The taking I might have found a way to address directly if I had believed a direct address would produce anything other than denial. The smiling told me that the person doing it understood exactly what they were doing and had organized themselves around it in a way that left no room for the kind of honesty that a real relationship requires. So I said nothing. Not at the office, where we occasionally occupy the same meeting rooms now, she at the level she was at before the promotion and I at the level the promotion created, a reversal that produces its own particular silence in the space between us when we are in the same room. Not to my parents, who know something happened between us at work and who have stopped asking because I have stopped answering. Not to mutual friends or colleagues or anyone who has asked, because what happened is documented and recorded and filed and does not need my narration to be real. I started as department head on a Monday in November. My first week I held individual meetings with every member of the team, the way I believe a department head should begin, by understanding what each person is working on and what they need and what is getting in their way. I took notes. I followed up. I made decisions based on the work rather than on the performance of the work, because I understand the difference between those two things in a way that I did not fully understand before 3 years of watching someone else perform mine. The department has had its strongest 2 quarters in 4 years since I took over. I did not send Priya the numbers. I did not need to. The numbers exist whether or not she sees them, and their existence does not require her acknowledgement to be real. On the last Friday of my 3rd month as department head, Gerald stopped by my office at the end of the day and said simply that he was glad I had sent the email. I told him I was glad I had kept the records. He said those were probably the same thing. He was right about that. If someone took credit for your work and smiled at you while doing it, leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe for the next one. This is Hidden Truth Revenge, where the truth always finds a way.